Welcome. Today is the 24th day of Tammuz, the 30th of July. We're going to be looking at the third reading of Matot and Massei when they're combined. And the third reading includes one of the most interesting and far-reaching episodes in the conquest of the land of Canaan, which ultimately becomes the land of Israel. And we read about the 2.5 tribes, Reuben, Gad, and half of Manasseh, who come to Moses and say, we've already conquered the eastern side of the Jordan River. These were the areas that were controlled by Sichon and Og, the Amorites, and we want to settle here. Meaning, in other words, that they want to remain on the eastern side of the Jordan, and it seems like they're doing something wrong. And I want to read to you what they say and Moses' response. And I want to note that I actually taught this week, a few hours ago actually, in length, in part of a series that we're now exploring, which is the meaning of death and what one might call the psychological battle against fear of death that we all have. And I'm not talking about that a person needs to be a hero at all, nothing like that. Not that type of fear of death. You should fear death in that sense. Talking about the fact that psychologically we all are much healthier and better off when we're able to chart our course into the future, when we are forward-looking. And in this series that I've been teaching on positive psychology, Homo prospectus, man as one who prospects, who looks forward to his future, is the key to good mental health. But the whole system and whole understanding of positive psychology runs into a problem when it comes with death, because if you are looking forward, you also have no choice but to look at your own demise. And that seems to contradict the idea that looking forward should be something that increases your mental health. And so the response really comes from Torah, and in that series I discussed that in length. I just want to mention how this relates to today's reading. So, getting back to these two tribes, they come and tell Moses the following. They say they had an abundance of livestock. We're looking at Numbers 31, verse 1. 32, verse 1. So the descendants of Reuben and Gad had an abundance of livestock, very numerous, and they saw the land of Yazer and the land of Gilad. Again, these were the areas that they conquered from the Amorites, and behold, the place was a place for livestock. So they came to Moses, and they said to him, these lands that God struck down before the congregation of Israel are a land for livestock, and your servants possess livestock. They said to Moses, if it pleases you, let this land be given to your servants as an estate, an inheritance. Do not take us across the Jordan. Moses doesn't take this lightly. He doesn't hear that this is just a question of where are we going to inherit our part of the land of Israel. He hears something entirely different, and he says to them, Moses said to the descendants of Gad and descendants of Reuben, again 32:6, should your brethren go to war while you stay here? Why do you discourage the Israelites from crossing over to the land which God has given them? And then he says, this sounds awfully familiar. I've heard this mantra before. 38 years ago, this is what your fathers did when I sent them from Kadesh Barnea to explore the land. The spies, that for us is just a few weeks ago, but in the chronology of the Torah happened 38 years ago. They went up to the valley of Eshcol and saw the land, and they discouraged the Israelites from coming into the land God has given them. God became angry that day, and he swore, saying, none of the men 20 years old and over who came out of Egypt will see the land that I swore to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob, for they did not follow me wholeheartedly. God became angry with Israel, and he made them wander in the desert for 40 years until the entire generation who had done evil in the eyes of God had died. And behold, we're looking at 32:14, you have now risen in place of your fathers as a breed of sinful people to add to the wrathful anger of God against Israel. What's going on? Why does Moses hear that this is a repeat of the spies? Why doesn't he just take it at face value? They didn't say they're not going to come into the land of Israel. Why does he understand it that way? And the reason really has to do with why they want to stay there. They don't say, at least not in the beginning, and we'll see how they correct themselves, but they don't say in the beginning, we're looking forward. They're saying, we're actually looking at the present and trying to solve our present problem. We don't have any prospective future that we're looking at. We're just looking at what we have. We have livestock. This is a land for livestock. Let's live here. This is the type of thinking that we associate with culture. It's a strange word to use, but it's actually the word that in modern Hebrew is taken from this episode and used to translate culture. And the word is, as we said in 32:14, Moses said to them, you're a breed of sinful people. And what he means literally is that you are like the descendants. The word in Hebrew is tarbut. Tarbut anashim chataim. You are descendants of the people who sinned the sin of the spies. You're the same breed. You're the same type. Because what were they looking at? They meant the very best. They wanted to continue the spiritual life of the present moment, living with the clouds of glory, living with Miriam's well, living with the manna coming down from heaven. They wanted to lead the purest, most spiritual life, and yet because they only wanted to preserve the present, they ended up doing the worst sin, apart from the golden calf, in the Pentateuch. The sin of the spies. Because all they could see was the present moment. That's all they had. And that's shocking, because how can you say that? They're leading the most spiritual life. What's wrong with that? Says Moses, this has nothing to do with what your present is like. To live life, to really know whether you are connected to God or not, there's really only one test. It's not how you're living your present. It's not how you're living the present moment. The present moment, and if you have prospects for the future. It's whether you are seeing life in its full capacity to grow, because that's what God is, infinite growth. Are you looking at it as, I just need to take care of the present, or do you have plans for the future and for the things that you need to do? The thinking here is that if you fear death, you're too steeped in the present. You're too connected to the material present. And even if you have a spiritual present, you still are too connected to it in the sense that you only want to preserve the present. And culture is like the present. That's what he calls it, a breed, a culture of sinful people. Sinful not because you did anything wrong necessarily, but because you don't have a future and you're only catering to your present. Why is that? Because God is much more than just the present. God is, as we say, Havaya, this permutation of the four-letter name. Havaya literally means, his name means Haya Hoveh Ve'yihiyeh. He was, he is, he will be. When God is asked by Moses, when the people ask me what is his name, what shall I say to them? He says, I will be what I will be. It's about the future. If you can't put the future into this equation, if you don't have room for the future, you're stuck in the present. Your conception is not of God, your conception is of your life. You're looking at yourself alone. If you look at the present and what you see is infinite potential, and what you see is growth, and what you see is what I will become, what I will be, then you are connected to God. And that's exactly the correction that they make. And they say to him in response, after Moses tells them, you're a culture, you're a breed of sinful people. So in verse 16, they say they approached him and said, we will build pens for our livestock here and cities for our children. We will then arm ourselves quickly to the front lines of the Israelite troops. Until we have brought them safely to their place, our children will reside in the fortified city on account of the inhabitants of the land. We will not return to our homes until each of the Israelites has taken possession of his inheritance. Their correction is to think of the future. What we're building really is for our children. It's not for the livestock. We're not interested just in the material. We're interested in the future. We're not just interested in that future. We're willing to sacrifice for that future. We're willing to see the Israelites, the rest of the tribes, through their struggle to help them not to come back until we've finished the job that they have to do. We're not just going to help them. We're going to go before everyone. Their whole thinking has changed. Their whole thinking has now become, what am I going to do? It's not, what do I need right now? It's, where am I going? What am I doing? What do I have as a goal? It's forward-thinking, perspective thought that is really godliness. And once they do this, Moses agrees with them, and he blesses them, and he gives them that land. And indeed, they follow through with their promises, and they become successful. Thanks for joining today. And I recommend, if you're not on my Patreon, to join patreon.com/mgenuth, my Patreon page. The whole series on positive psychology is there, along with a few hundred other classes on psychology from a Torah perspective. And I invite you to see the class on the series of classes that we're now giving on fighting the fear of death, which is really a constant battle to cleanse ourselves of our infatuation with the material present, and to be able to see the infinite in the present, to be able to see God in the present. And the moment that that is something that we see, we slowly cleanse ourselves of not being able to think about the future, being afraid of the future because the future always ends. Not saying sentences like, which Western culture is unfortunately very full of, everybody you know is eventually going to die. Those sentences are pure poison. They come from a material attachment to the world. It's not that we're against the material, we're very much for it, but we want to bring out the potential in it, the infinite potential in it. And to do that, we have to connect to God as being both past, present, and future. And the sign of that is when a person is able to plan, when we're able to look at the future, and only in a positive way. So thank you very much for joining. Hope to see you also on Patreon. All the best.